Imagine waking up one morning and everything is wrong. Not in a catastrophic, world-ending way. No explosions, no screams, no immediate disaster. Just wrong. The walls of your room seem unfamiliar. Your reflection in the mirror looks slightly distorted, like a version of you that doesn't quite belong. You step outside, and suddenly, the world no longer follows the rules you thought you understood. People speak in vague, cryptic statements. Laws exist, but no one can explain them. You're told you violated some rule, but what rule? No one knows. You try to protest, but the more you resist, the deeper you sink. The system doesn't care about justice. It doesn't care about truth. It only cares that you comply. This is the world of Franz Kafka. And if it feels eerily familiar, that's because you're already living in it. Example, the trial, when justice becomes a joke. In Kafka's novel The Trial, a man named Joseph K. is arrested without explanation. He asks what crime he's committed, but no one can tell him. The more he fights to clear his name, the more entangled he becomes in an endless bureaucracy that exists for no reason other than to sustain itself. Eventually, he stops questioning it, because fighting makes no difference. This is what it means to be Kafkaesque, to be trapped in an absurd, incomprehensible system that holds total power over you, yet gives you no answers. A world where reason doesn't matter, where you don't matter. The Kafkaesque horror of real life. You might think this is just fiction. But have you ever tried canceling a subscription, only to be trapped in an endless loop of automated responses? Have you ever felt powerless against the faceless bureaucracy of banks, governments, or corporations? Have you ever had your fate decided by some unseen algorithm that doesn't care who you are? That's the terrifying genius of Kafka. His stories feel like nightmares you've already lived. The most chilling part of Kafka's stories? They are already happening. Kafka doesn't write about fantasy. He writes about our world, just exaggerated. His work isn't a warning about the future. It's a diagnosis of the present. And the real question is, are you trapped in a Kafkaesque system right now? 2. The meaning of Kafkaesque, more than just absurdity. People use the word Kafkaesque to describe anything strange, frustrating, or surreal. A long line at the DMV, an email chain with customer service that leads nowhere, or a bizarre corporate policy. Many call these things Kafkaesque. But these examples don't fully capture the horror of Franz Kafka's world. Kafka's stories are not just about frustration or inconvenience. They are about powerlessness in the face of a system you cannot understand, fight, or escape. His worlds are cold, indifferent, and inescapable. His characters are trapped in nightmares where the harder they struggle, the more tangled they become. So what does Kafkaesque really mean? To understand, we need to break it down into 3 essential elements, 3 terrifying qualities that define Kafka's vision of reality. 1. The illusion of rules, but no one knows the rules. In a Kafkaesque world, you are expected to follow the rules. But no one knows what the rules actually are. You are told that some law exists, some regulation applies to you, some authority is judging you, but when you ask what you did wrong, no one can tell you. Example, the trial. In the trial, Joseph K. wakes up one morning to find himself arrested. But for what? The guards don't tell him. The court doesn't explain. Lawyers, judges, and officials shuffle him from one meeting to another, drowning him in confusing legal jargon. He spends the entire novel trying to understand his crime, only to realize that understanding is impossible. Real-life Kafkaesque nightmare. Imagine waking up one day to find your bank account frozen. You call customer service. They transfer you to another department. That department sends you to another. Hours pass. Days pass. No one gives you a straight answer. They all say it's just the policy. Or imagine trying to fix a mistake on a government form. You go to one office, and they tell you to visit another. That office sends you back to the first. You keep asking, what am I supposed to do? But every answer contradicts the last. Power doesn't need to explain itself. It only needs you to obey. 2. The system is not evil, it's indifferent. One of the most disturbing aspects of Kafka's world is that there is no villain. There is no dictator watching you, no mastermind controlling everything from the shadows. The system isn't cruel, it's worse than that. It doesn't care about you at all. Example, the castle. In the castle, the protagonist, K, is summoned to work in a mysterious village. But when he arrives, he is told he cannot enter the castle, the authority that governs the village. He tries everything, meetings, petitions, conversations with officials, but nothing works. The castle doesn't deny him. It doesn't approve him. It simply ignores him. Real-life Kafkaesque nightmare. Ever applied for a visa, a job, or an important document and waited for months with no response? You check the website. It says processing. You call the office. They say, check the website. You send an email. No one replies. You don't even get a rejection. Just silence. This is the true horror of Kafka's world. It's not oppression. It's nothingness. You are not crushed by a tyrant. You are swallowed by a void. The system doesn't need to be cruel. It only needs to be indifferent. 3. The more you resist, the deeper you sink. Perhaps the most terrifying part of Kafka's stories is that trying to escape only makes things worse. Example, the trial. Joseph K. doesn't simply accept his fate. He fights. He hires lawyers. He gathers evidence. He protests. But the more he resists, the guiltier he seems. Every attempt to understand his case only deepens his entanglement. In the end, he is executed without ever learning what he did wrong. Example, the metamorphosis. Gregor Samsa wakes up as a giant insect. He tries to act normal. He wants to go to work, to keep supporting his family. But no matter what he does, they slowly stop seeing him as a person. His humanity fades, not because of anything he did, but because society has decided he no longer matters. Real-life Kafkaesque nightmare. Ever been accused of something unfairly, and no matter how much you deny it, people assume you must be guilty? Ever been put on hold, transferred between departments, caught in an endless email chain, only to find yourself in a worse position than before? Kafka's horror is not about oppression, it's about hopelessness. Kafka's world is real, and you're already in it. Kafka's stories feel like nightmares. But what if they aren't nightmares at all? What if they are just our reality, seen with absolute clarity? Think about your daily life. The faceless bureaucracies. The meaningless rules. The frustration of feeling like a small, powerless cog in a machine too vast to fight. So here's the real question. If Kafka's world already feels real to you, what does that say about the world we live in? 3. The psychological horror of Kafka, when reality feels like a nightmare. Imagine waking up one morning to find that everything in your life has subtly changed. Your boss won't tell you why you're being investigated. Your landlord says there's a mistake with your rent, but won't explain what it is. A police officer stops you on the street, but refuses to tell you what crime you've committed. You try to resist, to ask questions, to demand answers, but the more you fight, the deeper the trap becomes. This is the world Franz Kafka created in his stories, a world where reality itself turns against you, where confusion is law, and where the harder you try to make sense of things, the more absurd they become. But here's the terrifying part. Kafka's stories feel like fiction until they start happening to you. Kafka's world is psychological horror in its purest form. It does not rely on ghosts, demons, or supernatural forces. Instead, it reveals a more unsettling truth. The greatest horror is an indifferent system, one that does not care whether you are guilty or innocent, one that does not care whether you even understand the rules. Why does this feel so terrifying? Because it taps into deep-rooted fears within human psychology, the fear of losing control, being powerless, and being judged by an unseen force. 1. The feeling of powerlessness when you realize you have no control. Imagine you're stuck in a maze, and every time you think you've found an exit, the walls shift. You are running, but you're going nowhere. No matter what you do, your efforts are ignored or even punished. This is the core fear that Kafka taps into, the fear that nothing you do will ever matter. Psychological concept, learned helplessness. In the 1960s, psychologists Martin Seligman and Stephen Meyer conducted a disturbing experiment. They placed dogs in a cage with an electrified floor. At first, the dogs tried to escape, but soon they realized that no matter what they did, they would get shocked. They gave up. Even when the door was later opened, the dogs did not run. They had learned that resistance was pointless. This is learned helplessness, when people stop fighting back because they believe they will never win. And this is exactly what happens in Kafka's world. Kafka's characters are trapped in a system they can't escape. Joseph K., in the trial, is put on trial for a crime he doesn't understand. He is told to defend himself, but no one will explain what he is accused of. He meets lawyers, judges, and officials, but none of them seem to know the rules either. The more he fights, the deeper he sinks. In the end, he simply gives up. Real-life Kafkaesque nightmare. Have you ever been trapped in a situation where nothing you did made a difference? A bureaucratic nightmare, where every attempt to fix something made it worse? A system so convoluted that no one, not even the people in charge, seem to understand it? The most terrifying realization is not that you are powerless, but that no one is in control. 2. Bureaucracy as a monster, when systems become more important than people. Kafka's horror isn't about evil dictators or sadistic villains. It's about something worse. Systems that keep running, even when they no longer serve a purpose. Bureaucracy is supposed to make life easier, is meant to create order. But in Kafka's world, it becomes a mindless, self-perpetuating machine that devours anyone who gets caught in it. Example, the trial. Joseph K. tries to navigate the court system, but every official, every lawyer, every judge is part of an endless cycle of paperwork, rules, and procedures. No one can explain anything. The system is not designed for justice. It is designed to keep itself alive. Psychological concept, the tyranny of meaningless rules. Psychologists call this the illusion of control, the belief that bureaucratic processes give us order and stability when, in reality, they often create chaos and confusion. Real-life Kafkaesque nightmare. Have you ever tried to cancel an internet subscription, only to be sent through an endless loop of customer service calls, verification codes, and paperwork, until you just gave up? Have you ever applied for a visa, a permit, or a government service, only to be told you needed a document that no one had ever mentioned before? The scariest part of bureaucracy is not its power, it's that no one is actually in control. 3. The fear of being judged without knowing why. One of the most disturbing aspects of Kafka's world is arbitrary judgment. His characters are often accused, watched, and punished without ever understanding what they did wrong. Example, the trial. Joseph K. is put on trial. He is told he is guilty. But of what? No one will say. The more he tries to prove his innocence, the more suspicious he looks. Psychological concept, the panopticon effect. Philosopher Michel Foucault described the idea of a panopticon, a prison where inmates are constantly watched but never know when. They begin to police themselves out of fear. This is the horror of the trial. Joseph K. does not know who is watching him, but he feels guilty anyway. Real-life Kafkaesque nightmare. Cancel culture. Social media mobs. Being fired from a job because of a vague violation of company policy, but no one will tell you exactly what you did wrong. The worst kind of prison is one where you are judged, but never told what your crime is. 4. The endless waiting. The most subtle horror of Kafka's world. Perhaps the most haunting element of Kafka's stories is the waiting. His characters are constantly told to wait, to be patient, to follow the process. But nothing ever happens. Example, the castle. In the castle, the protagonist K. tries to enter a mysterious castle to meet the authorities. But he's always told, come back tomorrow. The next day, he is told the same thing. The cycle never ends. Psychological concept, the anxiety of uncertainty. Studies show that humans prefer bad news over no news. We can handle suffering if we understand it. But Kafka's horror is the horror of waiting for an answer, for a decision, for a resolution that never comes. Real-life Kafkaesque nightmare. Waiting for medical test results. Waiting to hear back from a job interview. Waiting for a court decision that could determine your fate. The uncertainty is worse than the answer itself. Sometimes the greatest torment is not pain or punishment, it's endless uncertainty. Kafka's horror is psychological, and it's already happening to you. Kafka's stories are terrifying because they feel personal. We all know what it's like to feel powerless, trapped, or lost in an absurd system. The question is not whether Kafka's world exists. The question is, how much of your own life already feels Kafkaesque? For Kafkaesque in the modern world, how Kafka's nightmares became reality. It's easy to read Kafka's stories and think, that's just fiction. The world isn't really like that. But what if I told you that we are already living in a Kafkaesque reality? Think about it. Have you ever felt like you were stuck in an endless bureaucratic loop, fighting against a system that refuses to make sense? Have you ever been accused of something vague, left to defend yourself without knowing what you did wrong? Have you ever felt trapped in a life that seems to be controlled by unseen forces? Kafka's nightmares were not just literary imagination, they were warnings. And today, those warnings have come true in ways he could never have imagined. 1. Bureaucratic madness, when systems control us, not the other way around. Kafka's world of endless paperwork, confusing rules, and faceless authorities is no longer just fiction. It's everywhere. Customer service loops that never end. Ever tried canceling an internet service or disputing a bank charge? You are transferred from one representative to another, each telling you to call someone else. The process is designed not to help you, but to exhaust you until you give up. Government bureaucracy at its worst. People spend years waiting for immigration approvals, social security claims, or business permits, trapped in an endless cycle of submit this form, come back later. Your request is under review. Just like K, in the castle, people wait their whole lives for an answer that never comes. Psychological impact, learned helplessness in the modern age. Just like Kafka's characters, people begin to accept the absurdity. They stop questioning. They stop fighting back. They surrender to the system not because it is right, but because resistance is pointless. The system doesn't need to control you with force, it only needs to make you believe that you are powerless. 2. The trial by social media, when the crowd becomes the judge. In Kafka's The Trial, Joseph K. is judged by an unseen court for a crime he doesn't understand. Today, the court isn't hidden in the shadows, it's on your phone. Cancel culture and internet mobs. One wrong tweet, one misunderstood joke, one accusation, suddenly millions of strangers are attacking you. You are guilty before you even get a chance to defend yourself. Companies and employers acting like Kafka's court. People lose jobs because of vague policy violations that are never explained. The system says you should have known the rules, but no one will tell you what those rules actually are. Psychological impact, the fear of being watched. People censor themselves, afraid that one mistake could ruin their lives. They become prisoners, not of a physical cell, but of constant anxiety. Kafka's nightmare wasn't just about the law. It was about being judged by forces you cannot see or understand. 3. The endless waiting, living in an uncertain world. One of Kafka's greatest horrors is not punishment, it's the never-ending waiting for something that may never happen. The anxiety of modern life. People wait for job offers, visa approvals, medical diagnoses, trapped in limbo, unable to move forward. The waiting itself becomes torture. The digital age has made it worse. We wait for responses to emails, messages left unread, applications lost in a system. Everything is automated, yet nothing is efficient. Psychological impact, the fear of uncertainty. Studies show that uncertainty is more stressful than actual bad news. People can endure pain, but they cannot endure not knowing. Sometimes the worst suffering is not pain, but never knowing when it will end. We are all living in Kafka's world. The only question is, can we escape? Kafka's world isn't just fiction, it is real. Bureaucracy, endless waiting, invisible judges, and the feeling of powerlessness, these are the horrors of modern life. So what can you do? You can start by recognizing it. The first step to breaking free from a Kafkaesque nightmare is understanding that you are in one. You must resist the illusion that you are powerless. You must question the absurdity. You must refuse to become another nameless character lost in the system. Because the most terrifying thing about Kafka's world isn't that it exists. It's that most people don't even realize they're living in it. 5. The final warning. Are you trapped in a Kafkaesque nightmare? At this point, you might be thinking, this is all fascinating, but what does it have to do with me? The truth is, Kafka's world isn't just a story. It's your life. Right now, you might be living inside an invisible prison, one built by bureaucracy's social expectations and unseen forces that control your choices. But the scariest part? You might not even realize it. The question is, how do you know if you're trapped? 1. The 3 signs you are living in a Kafkaesque world. 1. You follow rules that make no sense, but you obey anyway. Have you ever filled out a ridiculous form, obeyed an unclear policy, or accepted a decision that seemed completely irrational, just because that's the way it is? Kafka's characters never question the system. They just submit. Have you done the same? 2. You feel like you're being judged, but you don't know why. Have you ever felt like people are watching you, waiting for you to make a mistake? Social media, workplace politics, cancel culture. Today, judgment is everywhere. Joseph K. in the trial had no idea what he was accused of. Do you? 3. You're always waiting, but you don't know what for. Are you waiting for the perfect job, the right time to start something, or an opportunity that never comes? Kafka's characters are stuck in a cycle of waiting, never reaching their destination. Are you? You don't need to be locked in a physical cell to be a prisoner. Sometimes the prison is in your mind. 2. The only way to escape, Kafka's hidden message. Kafka doesn't offer clear solutions in his stories because the real solution isn't external. It's internal. Step 1. Recognize the absurdity. Once you see the system for what it is, it loses its power. Step 2. Refuse to be passive. Question the rules, challenge authority, and stop waiting for permission. Step 3. Take control of your story. In Kafka's world, the characters don't fight back. But you can. The ultimate Kafkaesque nightmare isn't just bureaucracy or social judgment. It's the slow, quiet realization that your life is not your own. But the moment you wake up, the moment you decide to take back control, that's when you escape. Because in the end, Kafka's world only exists for those who accept it. 3. The final question, are you awake? If you were a character in Kafka's stories, would you realize it? Or would you, like Joseph K., simply accept your fate until it's too late? The choice is yours. But are you absolutely sure you're not already trapped? Everything we've explored today isn't just literature. It's your reality. You see, Kafka's world wasn't fiction, it was a warning. A warning about systems that don't care, about invisible forces that control us, about the slow erosion of free will. And the worst part, most people never even notice it happening. So I have one final question for you. Are you still asleep? Or are you ready to wake up? If this video made you uncomfortable, good. That means you're starting to see the cracks in the system. But knowing is only the first step. The next step, breaking free. Subscribe now. Not just for more videos, but for a community that refuses to sleepwalk through life. Because here, we don't just study dangerous ideas, we confront them. We question the rules. We see the hidden forces shaping our reality. And most importantly, we wake up. So if you're ready to start seeing the world as it truly is, click subscribe. And remember, in a Kafkaesque world, the only real escape is understanding.